In the first reading, we hear the call of Abram. And in that short reading, we see a simple pattern of what a call is in the Bible as it was carried out through the many calls we hear. Abram's call went like this. First of all, he was called to leave someplace. Okay, he's 75 years old or so. So is his wife. And he's called to get up and go someplace else, to leave. He had to leave things behind, leave behind who he knew, leave behind the comfortable, where he was comfortable with things, but he had to get up and go. And in the Bible, we have, as we listen to the calls of other people, oftentimes, geographically, they have to get up and go someplace else. Jesus sent the apostles throughout all of the known world at the time, and they went to preach. He said, got to get up and you got to move. And it's not only a geographical place that you have to move. Sometimes it's, maybe more often, it's an internal place. You got to change what it is that we think, how it is that we perceive things, psychologically, spiritually, or intellectually. It's like we got to move from where we are and let go of what we've been thinking and move on to something else. That's the first thing. Because in the Bible you will notice that no one is ever told in their call, no one is ever told, stay where you are. Don't change a thing. You're just fine. It's always a call to move, isn't it? To let go of where we are. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we are called to go to some place we do not know. The call to Abram was, go to some place I will show you. Where is that on the map? He had no map. He had no GPS. He just had to get up and to go someplace where God was going to show him. That's kind of iffy in my book. But he did it. And that's the same call that everybody else gets. To go to some place that you don't know. An example would be, St. Paul. As he's going on his road to Damascus. Because on his road to Damascus, St. Paul was someone who persecuted Christians. And on his way to Damascus, he met Jesus. And a little bit later, we find out he's not persecuting Christians. He's preaching Christ, and was one of the greatest preachers, especially to the Gentiles, the greatest preacher. But from what he thought to what he ended up preaching was a 180-degree shift. Wow. I got to think differently. I've been misperceiving this all the time, is what he says. And the same things are true for the prophets or any other call you want to look at. You need to go someplace where you don't know and do something differently, think differently, change the inside, our own frame of mind to something different, something new. And it's scary. And then the third thing is that God promised Abram, he says, and I will make of you a great nation. Right. At the age of 75, you're going to make of me a great nation. How is that supposed to happen? Good question. How it's supposed to happen is to listen to the Lord, put our faith in him, and follow what he teaches us along the way, where it is that he's leading us. And that's kind of a hard thing to do because we can't see God, you know. Okay, what happened in the midst of this? In the midst of this, Abram was transformed. And in the Bible, when someone is transformed, their name is usually changed. Abram became Abraham. Simon became Peter the Rock. Saul became Paul. You get the drift. There's some transformation that goes on, and the change of the name signals that transformation. That as I thought of all this, it kind of reminded me of our lives. Nothing I've said here is foreign to our lives, is it? Because we're all called to get up and move, to leave something behind. Maybe geographically, and maybe internally with our frame of mind, with psychologically, spiritually, or emotionally. I think of all of that, first of all, geographically. I was counting it up, and I counted that I've moved 13 times in being a Franciscan. I talked to somebody after Mass last time, and says, I got you beat. I moved 17 times. It's like, okay, good for you. 13's okay for me so far. But every time I move into a place I do not know. With people, mostly I don't know anybody. I might know the friars I'm being called to live with, but most of the time I haven't lived with them before. I don't know how that's going to go. So it's kind of scary to move to a new place geographically. And I know some of you have done that, and some have done it often. And I know some people have been living in the same house for 40 years. But you're not free, because we are also called to move internally, to let go of those things that we think, that frame of mind that we have that no longer applies. An example. Well, it might come with someone we love. Maybe there's an illness. Maybe there's a death. For someone who's lost a spouse, talk about getting up and moving. You got to leave behind the life you had, and it changes your whole lifestyle, doesn't it? You lose a spouse. Or if a person becomes disabled, the question now is, who am I now? I got to leave behind what I thought of myself, my own self-image, and say, who am I now? What happens now? How do I live? Or maybe a guy would think, I've been strong all my life. I work out, I've been strong physically, try to be a strong character, try to hold up and do things, like a man, and find out that maybe this guy finds out that, he's just as weak as everybody else. He gets sick. He has maybe a surgery or two. The doctors can tell him, this is the kind of pain you're going to feel. And he does. And he finds out that he's just as weak as everybody else. And you got to leave his invincible kind of thought, image of himself behind, and move to a different space. To think differently, to face life differently in his new identity. Or it could be that with someone we love, and we've got our own prejudice in mind about whatever group you want to talk about. Maybe it's racial, maybe it's religious, maybe it's about gay people, the gay and lesbian thing, or it could be about, Muslims or somebody, whatever prejudice we have. And then we find out that our son or daughter, or our brother or our sister, is going to marry one of them. Or they're going to bring them home. And there we are, face to face with the reality that what we thought is being challenged. Am I going to kind of disown my son or my daughter because they're doing this? And if not, how do I integrate that into my life? And who am I now to them, and how were they to me? And you got to get up. You got to move. You got to let go. We have to let go of what's behind, because we're being called to a new kind of frame of mind, a new consciousness. And then in the midst of that's the third thing, that we do it in faith. Because in the midst of that is the call from God. That's not to say that everything happens to us in our lives or everything that happens to somebody else in their lives is designed by God, because I don't believe God brings tragedy into our lives. You can believe that if you want. I'm just telling you, I don't believe it. God doesn't cause tragedy, at least in my faith. So when something happens, maybe it's not caused or called by God, but in the midst of what happens, God calls us to be faithful to Him and to have Him faithful enough in Him so that we might trust Him enough that He might show us where it is He wants us to go. In the midst of where you are right now, okay, listen to me and I'll show you where you are to go, beyond where you are now, to someplace you don't know. Someplace which is unfamiliar and maybe a little bit scary. And that brings us to the transfiguration. Because the disciples experienced a little bit of this, and we're going to experience a whole lot more of this before Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. And in the transfiguration, they saw an image of who Jesus was and eventually, ultimately, who we are called to be. And the glory of God just shone through Him. And then we would see Jesus as He continues to live His ministerial life and end up in His passion, death, and resurrection. It's not just a transfiguration, it is a transformation. That He was transformed from the divine and human being that He was into a resurrected Christ. And that we are all called to the same thing. That we are able to say, I believe in the Christ who was transformed and who has promised to transform me as I continue to move through life. To leave behind maybe some things I don't want to leave behind. To move into some place maybe I don't even want to go. To find a God who is with me always and leads me there. Jesus was transfigured on the mountain. He was transformed through His passion, death, and resurrection. And by our following Him in faith, we can be and will be transformed ourselves into the likeness of Christ.